Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of That's Ruddy Mysterious, a podcast of short tales about true mysteries. What created the Potomsky Crater? Who was involved in the 1963 Great Train Robbery? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sruddymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the Broaddus family watcher. In 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus found and purchased their dream home in Westfield, New Jersey, a home into which they would never move. The house was just under 4,000 square feet with 6 bedrooms and was built in 1905. It was at 657 Boulevard. The Broadduses purchased it for $1.3 million. It was perfect for their family of 5. Just 1 week after purchasing the house in June of 2014, the Broadduses received their first threatening letter. They had been renovating the house before the family moved in, and Derek went out to the mailbox. Inside, he found a letter addressed to new owner. There was no return address, but the letter had been processed through the Kearney, New Jersey post office, which was just about 20 miles away. The letter started off friendly enough. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, but then turned dark by asking if the owners knew what was in the walls, and then asked why the owners were there. The letter continued, ominously saying the writer was watching the house and that the writer's family had been doing so for decades. It said the writer had been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. It continued, my grandfather watched the house in the 1920s and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. The letter then went on to confirm that the writer was watching the house by describing details about the work that was being done on the house. The letter then continued by referencing the Broaddus' young children, asking if the owners needed the writer to fill the house with the young blood I requested. It asked if the Broaddus' old house was too small for them, or if they moved into 657 Boulevard because of greed. It continued, once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. It finished by saying that there were hundreds of cars that passed the house and that the writer could be in any one of them. Or they could be someone who walks past the house daily, and suggested the Broadduses look out the many windows at everyone who passes the home. It then welcomed the family and said, let the party begin. The letter was from the Watcher. This obviously put the Broaddus family on edge, and they decided to wait to move into the home. 2 weeks later, there was another letter in the mailbox. It said that 657 Boulevard was anxious for the family to move in. The letter said it had been years since there had been young blood ruling the house and hallways, and asked if the family had discovered all of the house's secrets yet. It referred to the basement of the house, asking if the children would play there, and then saying that the writer would not because it was too far from the rest of the house to hear the children scream. The letter went on to ask where everyone would sleep, saying that knowing that would make it so the writer could plan better. This letter, like the previous letter, referred to the windows at 657 Boulevard, saying that because of all the windows, the watcher could track the family's movements. It went on to ask, who am I? I am the watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. The watcher again offered clues as to their identity. They said that they passed the house many times a day. The letter said the house was their job, life, and obsession, and now the family was too. The letter accused the Broadduses of being greedy by saying that being watched was a product of your greed. It also said greed was what had brought the past 3 families to the house as well. It finished by saying, have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching. The letter so unnerved Derek and Maria that they delayed moving into the house. They asked the previous owners if they'd received any letters, and they said they'd received one a few days before moving out, but thought nothing of it and threw it out. A few weeks later, another letter arrived. The third letter told the Broadduses that the house was missing them and asked where they had gone. The Broadduses decided that they couldn't move into the house. They sued the previous owners for not disclosing that they had received threatening letters as well. 6 months after receiving the first letter, the Broadduses tried unsuccessfully to sell the house. In the spring of 2016, the Broadduses rented it out. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived addressed to Derek and Maria. This fourth letter told them that the house had survived their attempted assault. It said that the writer's soldiers had followed their orders to a T and carried out their mission to save the soul of the house. It then became very threatening, suggesting the Broadduses might die in a car crash or a fire, or maybe an illness that never goes away. It suggested that maybe the Broadduses would experience the death of a pet or a loved one. It said that planes, cars, and bicycles crash and that bones break. It told the Broadduses that they were despised by the house and that the Watcher had won. It referenced the deposition in the lawsuit against the previous owners. All while they were receiving these threatening letters, the Broadduses were working with the police to determine who was sending them. The police ran a DNA test on one of the envelopes and determined it belonged to a woman. The Broadduses suspected several of their neighbors of being the Watcher. The Langfords were the only neighbors that had been there since the 60s, but the police ruled them out as suspects. The DNA found in the envelope did not match any of the Langfords. The police believe the culprit must live within 300 yards of 657 Boulevard, and there are only 10 houses in that radius. But so far, the police have not been able to find the culprit. The Broadduses hired a private investigator to determine who was sending the letters. That investigator staked out the neighbors and ran a background check on the Langfords, but came up with nothing. They also hired 2 former FBI agents to conduct a threat assessment. The FBI agents thought the culprit must be older. There were several clues that pointed in that direction. The letters that addressed the Broadduses directly were addressed to M/M Broaddus. The salutations mentioned the weather, and there were double spaces after each sentence. The former FBI agents didn't believe the Watcher was an actual threat. They suggested the Broadduses look into former housekeepers or their descendants. The focus was still on the Langfords, so with the cooperation of the local police, Derek sent an anonymous letter to the Langfords saying that the Broadduses were tearing down 657 Boulevard. There was no response. The police believe the Langfords are probably innocent. They cite the fact that 2 letters arrived after police interviewed the Langfords. Who wrote the letters to the Broaddus family? Many people think the Broadduses wrote the letters themselves. They say that the Broadduses couldn't afford the large mortgage for 657 Boulevard and wrote the letters in an attempt to get out of it. The DNA in the envelope was not a match to Maria, however. Some believe the writer was a competing buyer that lost out on the house when the Broadduses purchased it. Others believe it was someone with a grudge against the Broadduses. The former FBI agents believe that the writer was a neighbor in their 50s or 60s. The police have yet to find the culprits. Their investigation is still open but not active. In 2017, the Broadduses attempted to sell 657 Boulevard to a developer and subdivide the land. The neighbors fought against it, however, so they were unable to complete the sale. In 2019, the Broadduses were finally able to sell the house at a $400,000 loss. The new owners have not received any threatening letters from the Watcher, but the police have visited their house at least 58 times since they moved in, mostly due to burglar alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, and once for a medical call. In 2018, The Cut ran an article about this case, which only made it harder for the Broadduses to sell their home. And in 2022, Netflix released a fictional series based on the article called The Watcher. Who sent the Broadduses threatening messages, and why did they do it? Was it all a hoax on the part of the family? Or is there really someone watching 657 Boulevard? What do you think? Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ruddy Mysterious. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and follow That's Ready Mysterious to be updated about new episodes. Tune in next Tuesday for another thought-provoking tale.